Okay, on this week's episode, we're not going to do a full dig into my guest's life journey, but I, of course, want to share with you a little bit about her as to why we're here talking today and talking about mental health and all sorts of things, life things, relationship things, living in this world things. So, so tell us a little bit about you, Tara, which by the way, I hate that sort of question. So now I'm like, what? But like, how
Yeah.
about, yeah, like since we're going to be talking about mental health, what would you say is like a bit of your mental health journey?
Yeah. So I consider myself like first and foremost an advocate for myself and for others along this journey. I started having symptoms of a mental health crisis when I was about 19 years old. I was a junior in college, didn't know what was going on. Mental health was never part of the conversation back then. This was like the early 90s. And it wasn't talked about. You didn't have it in high school. It wasn't depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. None of that was brought to the table, um, at least in my high school. And not even really in college, unless you were taking like a psychology tracked coursework. So it wasn't talked about, and I didn't know what was going on. I
Like
just knew
what
that I,
was, yeah, like, yeah, what was happening? So you didn't know what was
yeah.
going on, but you felt
So
what, like, yeah, what were these things
right.
that were
So I
happening
was,
that you're like, something's
yeah.
not right,
So
but what is it?
I guess I can start by saying like I'm diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, which is a form of schizophrenia. And schizophrenia is a scary word for a lot of people, just because it has this really like negative connotation in the media. You know, you hear about shooters having psychosis and schizophrenia, but for me, it started out as having like these delusions. And I started having them when I was like 19, along with depression. And I was convinced that I was pregnant, even though I wasn't sexually active. So I was like obsessed with this, and I believed it, even though I knew part of me knew it couldn't be true, but I believed it like it was. So
And
I
was
would
there
actually
any
like,
like evidence like later that you figured out why that would have, you know what I mean? Like even something is like, wow, I was watching this movie about a pregnant teenager and I fell asleep and woke up and think I was me.
yeah,
You're like, you know, is there anywhere that was ever even
yeah,
tracked like
like
how
I
that came to
had
be?
I had some sexual trauma when I was a younger teenager. Like when I was like 16 or 17, I had some sexual trauma. So that's the only place I can think of that it originated from. But it wasn't like one event where I was like, yeah, I was watching this movie on this pregnant woman and it got into my head. Like it wasn't like that. I don't know. It just like out of the blue, like these weird like thoughts and beliefs started coming up for me, and I was like, this is not like, and I became obsessed with them. Like, I would literally like beat myself in my stomach because I was so scared of having a baby when I was in college, but I wasn't pregnant. Like, that was the thing. So I went to my family doctor and I was like, this is not like, this is what's happening, and I don't think it's right. And he was like, oh, I think you have anxiety. And that was my family doctor at the time. And you got to keep in mind, this was like 1994, 95. So even family doctors weren't really trained in mental health. So there was no referral to a psychiatrist. There was no referral to a counselor. It was just like, hey, let's try you on some Zoloft, like, which was an antidepressant, which was supposed to be good for anxiety, which just made things 100 times worse because I wasn't sleeping then at that point. And it was making me even more kind of out of my head loopy. But that was what really started me on my journey. And somehow I pieced together enough stability for the rest of my college career to get through it. Um, but then it was after college that things really started to fall apart for me. And I was 23 when I was first hospitalized, and that was a scary thing to experience as a 22, 23-year old, because in the hospital you have no rights. You're locked up. And it's almost like jail, really. I mean, I've never been in the criminal justice system, but your rights are completely taken away. You're told to take this medicine. You can't watch TV. You're told when to get up. You're told when to take a shower. They watch you when you eat. They watch you when you sleep. There's cameras in the rooms. If you if you don't know what you're doing, or you're really psychotic, or you're really having a hard time, you have to be in isolation. Like, it's not a healthy environment at all, and it's
And
not a
what were the
healing environment.
circumstances? What were the circumstances that put you in there? And
Yeah.
how did your parents have to admit you? Did like a boss? Like how did you just go,
Yeah,
I need
it
help? Like,
no, well, it was kind of a combination of both. So I was homeless before this I was homeless. And I was just kind of couch surfing between friends' apartments. And then I finally came back home to my parents' house, and I was having voices telling me to hurt myself. So I was actually hearing voices telling me to hurt myself, and that would make things better. So one day I did. I cut my ankle up, and
mm,
my mom found me with the knife, and I had like an X-Acto knife, and she found me with that in my hand, and she was like, "What are you doing?" And there was blood all over the place, and it was a mess. And I was like, "I think I need help. I don't know what's going on." And she was like, "Okay, well, we're going to get you to the hospital." And she had some experience as a psychiatric nurse. Actually, my mom was a nurse. So she kind of knew, like, this girl needs some serious help. Um, and at the time, I was like 22, 23 years old. I had no idea what was going on, didn't know what I was in for, didn't have a diagnosis, had no insurance, had no job, had, I mean, I had a home because I was living with my parents, but I wasn't independent. And I just got put in the hospital. And from that moment, I was told that that would be my life, that I would be
mm.
on disability benefits for the rest of my life, that I probably wouldn't work, that I probably didn't have much of a future to look forward to except living with my illness. And then I was given a
Is
pretty
that, did you
grim
get
prognosis.
Okay, that's what I was gonna say. Did they
Yeah,
like, they
so I
gave you
got,
some prognosis and that's what led them to tell
right,
you, well, this is it for
right.
you?
So they gave me a diagnosis in the hospital of bipolar disorder with psychotic features, which was incorrect, but it stuck for a long time until I was actually correctly diagnosed, which wouldn't be until about 7 years later. So everybody thought I had bipolar disorder when actually that wasn't the main problem. Like, it was actually the thought disorder. So bipolar disorder is a mood disorder, right? So you have periods of elevation and periods of depression, which I was having, but the main problem was my thoughts, and the fact that I was just totally having these delusional beliefs. Like, I thought that if I baptized myself with pool water, it would keep me from going crazy. I thought that there were worms eating my brain.
Oh my goodness. Ugh.
I thought it was terrifying, because I didn't know what was happening.
And so when
And I
you left
remember,
with that
yeah,
diagnosis, are they then like, great, here's, a bunch of different prescriptions and then like, yeah, so you're on
right.
disability for the rest of your life and best wishes? Like
Right, pretty
just
much. They pretty much, yeah, and it was much different back then. And now there's a little bit more coordination of care, but back then it was like, here's a script for 30 days of meds. Find yourself a psychiatrist, and, get into some kind of community mental health program. And I was like, "Oh, okay." So over the years in my 20s, that just grew into, at one point, I was taking 23 pills a day. I was on like 8 different medications.
And did you just
Um,
accept, like, I have no idea.
yeah,
Obviously the you were in an altered
right.
like state
And
realm anyway, so it's not like I could imagine
right,
period. Like there's no way I could imagine, but like, yeah, if somebody, an official person is like, this is it. So
right.
were you just like, this is it? This is
Yeah.
my
And
life,
yeah,
period,
and I
end
was
of
kind of like,
story.
okay, like, you're a doctor, you know best. And that's kind of the way that the medical model is set up today, that the doctor is the expert, not the person. I believe the opposite. I believe the person is the expert. The doctor should be there for ancillary support. But, a doctor says, here, take this. This will be, let's try this, see if this gets you better. Um, let's try this pill. Let's try this intervention. And most of the time, it just led me back into the hospital. So I was hospitalized 7 times in my
Mm.
20s, which was hard. And you see a lot of horrible things in there. And um, it's not a pleasant place to be, and it's not a recovery oriented place to be, but it kept me safe from hurting myself even more because I was still having the voices to hurt myself. Um, but
And how did you end up
eventually,
getting, yeah, the other diagnosis?
yeah, so eventually I started seeing a doctor, and I said, and I had decided at some point, I think like about maybe 2 years or 3 years into my journey, of these endless hospitalizations and taking pills and being on disability and Medicaid and all of just being in the system, that wasn't good enough for me, and that that my life had just become unmanageable. So I said, I can't do this anymore, and I found a doctor that was willing to work with me, and listen to my input. I did a lot of research. I just read as much as I possibly could. I decided that if I wanted to get better, I had to go back to work, and I had to find meaningful work, because work is a huge component of my life and my worth, my self worth. So I just started small. I started going back to work part time, and I decided that I wanted to work in mental health,
And when you
and
said
that I
going
wanted
back to
to,
work, was that just like
yeah,
to work period? Like, let me go find a part-time job somewhere? Or was it
yeah.
like re-entering a
No,
position you
I
previously
just was
had?
like, let me find a part-time
Like, let
job.
me accept any job to
Yeah,
be, let
yeah,
me be of service, let me go to work.
yeah, exactly. And and back at that time, the internet wasn't like fully functional. Like nobody went on Indeed. Like, so I literally scoured the newspaper for ads, and I found a job working in a geriatric psychiatric unit doing activities. And I was an activities therapist. So I would do activities with the old folks who were there with
Wow.
dementia. And eventually a program opened up at my community mental health agency. It was a residential program for adults coming out of the state hospital. And I thought, oh, these are my people. Like, these are my peeps. I'm going to do this. And I started working there. And two
Wow.
years in, I decided that if I wanted to do anything in this field, I'd have to go to grad school. So I moved from Pennsylvania to San Francisco, and I started grad school. And
That,
I
okay,
got my
that's a
master's.
big,
That's
like,
a big leap.
especially like it sounds like you were just combing through the newspaper looking for a job, not like,
Yeah,
let me go try to help people who are struggling
right,
with like
right.
whatever. It's just like
Because
you
all of my
landed. Like I
experience,
assumed
like,
like you went and like had, oh, I'm going to go work at this, fast food restaurant, or I'm going to work at this
right,
office or something, like some very like entry level job. And then it
right.
ends up like, I guess, working in that uh like elderly care, or I don't know what the
Yeah, it was in
terminology
a
was.
hospital. Yeah.
And
So I had
then,
actually I actually got a job in a psychiatric unit where I had been a patient. So I just was working with the geriatric population. And I decided that that was it for me because my
wow.
previous experience had been like a bartender, a waitress. Like my first job out of college, my undergrad degree is in theater. So my first job in college was as a singing waitress at a restaurant on Broadway. Like I lived in
Oh
New
my
York
gosh.
City.
You see, I was
So
all like, I don't want to, we're not going to get into your life journey. And now I'm like, let's get into, I can't help myself. I'm so,
I know. It's a crazy story. I mean, I hate to use that word, but it is like it's a really fascinating story. And yeah, so it led me to where I am today, and I got my master's degree in counseling psychology. And but anyway, to get the correct diagnosis, I came back and I met this doctor, and I said, "This is what I have, and this is what I know, and these are what my symptoms are." And he said, "You're exactly right." And he said, "Let's get you on the right medications." Um, and my life changed when I found the right combination of medications, that worked for me at the minimum level. Not taking 23 pills a day. And I found that one, it's such a trial and error with medications because some people choose to take them, some people choose not to. For me, it's a choice that I make, that I graciously accept into my life. Medication, will I take it forever? Maybe. I don't know, but it works right now. And I just recently went off two of them, so I'm down to like two pills a day, which is fantastic.
And
From
what led
taking
you to
23.
going off some of them?
Yeah, so last
Like,
year I
how is
had a
that
trip.
choice made?
Yeah, it was really scary actually, because I was on a mood stabilizer and an antidepressant for a long time, multiple years, like 15 years I was on these medications since like 2004. Um, and Last year I had a traumatic brain injury. I was attacked by a psychotic patient at my job. I was working in a residential program as a clinical manager, and two of the residents became escalated and violent and punched me in the head. So I had a traumatic brain injury, and the neurologist said, I think it would be a good idea if you got off some of these medications because I think they're
Oh,
actually making your brain injury worse. And I think that's why you're slow and why you have brain fog and why you're having trouble sleeping. And I said, okay. So I talked to I see a nurse practitioner for my psychiatric meds, and she said, do you think this is really a good idea? And I said, I don't know, but we got to try it. And so we slowly tapered off both of them, and I'm living to tell the tale. So it was successful. But there is one medication that I take that I will not um, mess with. I won't go off of it. I won't adjust the dose. It just works for me. I know it works for me. I have very few side effects from it, and it's like my little miracle drug. So I don't question that one, but um, yeah, but it's been quite a journey. And now I work at our community mental health agency, and I'm the director of psych rehab and recovery services. So I oversee all of adult mental health. So it's really a success story of going from a patient and they call them consumers or participants in service to somebody who's directing an agency and leading these programs at a com- county mental health agency. So now I'm the boss lady and I'm in charge of this program. And before I was just a person in services. So
yeah. Wow. Um, like I said, I'm like, yeah, I'm like trying to like, oh, I want to talk about the things we're going to talk about, and then also I'm like, oh, I want to keep going into your journey.
yeah, yeah.
Well, yeah. So you have, because yeah, one of the things I wanted to talk about with you, or I thought would be interesting to dive into, is that I posted on my social media yesterday, getting like curious
Yeah.
to ask people like, what do you wish that people were more open about? And to not say like, oh, that people are lying about things, but things that we as humans, as a society as a whole end up hiding or not being open about and sharing. And I make up a lot of that is because of shame. Either we feel shame
Absolutely.
for it or we feel like we are going to be shamed for it, which, if you think of like my thought process is like, oh, like if we are in the fear of being judged, then it's usually because we're judging ourselves. So you might not
Mhm.
feel shame for something and think, no, 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 it's
Right.
just the world. Like if I just like, like this is something so small, but it's like something I feel, right? Oh, if somebody's coming over, like even to pick up something, but they're just going to walk into my house, I better pick up. Oh my gosh, what are they going to think? Like,
Right.
think of me if my house is not in perfect order and let me get clean as many things as I can real quick. Like, not that
Right.
I live in filth. And like I have
Right.
young kids that will, no matter how many times I ask them to put things away, they won't. And I will go through phases of doing it for them and then be like, I give up until I clean like on Saturday, right? So my
Right.
house is often in a state of chaos. And so it's like this thing, but I realize I'm perpetuating this though, right? So like as we as
Right.
people then, if everybody's likely feeling this pressure that everything has to be in an order, because then like that makes me a good home person's whatever. I was gonna say
Right.
homeowner, but I'm not a homeowner. That makes me a good,
Right. Home
resident
person.
of planet Earth. I don't know what it is. A good caretaker of the place that I live in or whatever. Like let me
Right.
see that, like but I remember one time going over to a friend's house who like, has beautiful design taste and everything in their home is like so
Right.
well chosen. and they
Right.
have young kids too. And I went over and it was a mess. And I was so grateful for that. Like,
Yes.
I was
I
like,
know, like I'm thinking of myself right
thank
now,
you
like
for
with my
letting us
baseball
come
cap on and
over.
like my hoodie, and I'm like, I am not dressed up for the occasion, but like this is real life. Like I did an 8-hour training today. Like this is what you get.
Yeah, which in
And
that, and
there's
it's
no
funny.
shame. There should be no shame in that,
And it's interesting
like
because my physical appearance, I have less like, shame and care about. I still will. Like, oh no, I'm invited to a party in LA. So what, like, like, oh, what am I
right,
gonna look like? Because what are the other people? And I have to like talk myself to this process. But anyway, so I'm like, oh, they're gonna judge me, but I'm fine. I'm happy with the way I live or this. But then if I feel
right,
any sort of urge of I'm gonna be judged, then they're usually for me, I feel like it's because then I am feeling some sort of shame or I'm judging myself. Because otherwise, then why the fuck do
absolutely,
I care? If they
right,
might judge me because they walk into my house is messy or because I didn't, my hair is not colored and I have a lot of gray or like whatever the thing may be, So
right,
I'm always like that. So I do think a lot of things people are not open about is because they may feel some level of shame
right.
about
Right.
it.
And stigma is the ultimate shaming um element, like there's so much stigma behind mental health. Like it took me a long time to be able to come out and say like I have a serious mental illness, I have a form of schizophrenia. Like that's like I would have never done that 20 years ago. Like I would have never said that. Like in the first like 10 years of my career in this field, I never disclosed that I had a serious mental illness. Now it's like the cornerstone of my work. And like I build my practice on my lived experience. And it's such a rich and unique and viable perspective in today's recovery community. But 10 years ago, 20 years ago, I would have never said, oh, I have schizophrenia, or, like I have, like I hear voices, or, I've had the experience of delusions, and, um, I have this funny story, and I'm actually like considering writing a book, but I have some stuff down at first. But I connected when Facebook first came out back in like the like middle of 2000s. I connected with my old college roommate, and he was like, "What's been going on with you?" And I'm like, "Well, I went a little crazy." And he's like, "Well, what do you mean?" And I'm like, there's two kinds of crazy. So there's like fajita crazy, where you go to the Mexican restaurant and you're like, I'm feeling a little crazy. I'm gonna order the fajitas.
I'm gonna
And
have
then there's
nachos and the
right,
fetus
I'm feeling a little crazy. I'm gonna
and
order
the
the
dessert. Oh, that's on fire, or like whatever.
right, right, the frozen ice cream. And then there's pool water crazy, which is where I baptized myself with pool water to keep myself from entering the black hole, right? So there's two different kinds of crazy. Like so there's fajita crazy and there's pool water crazy. And I was like, I went pool water crazy. And he's like, oh, he's like, actually, like I really understand that. And he's like, I get it. And I was like, yeah, I'm like, he's like, we all, have our struggles. And I was like, "Yeah, absolutely." And it was a beautiful way to reconnect. But, um, I feel like I, can reclaim that word a little bit, as much as it's used in such a negative way sometimes. But, stigma is the huge killer of honesty and coming out and sharing your story. And there's this whole movement, this peer support movement in mental health, which is people using their lived experience to share their story and say, hey, I was once in your shoes and I walked the walk and now I'm here, and there's more for life than you can, imagine, that are beyond the walls of a hospital, that are beyond the walls of a treatment facility, that are beyond the walls of a community mental health agency. And your life is really what you want to make it. And I did that. So in a way, I'm kind of living proof of that too. I don't think mental health is a death sentence. And I think that being open and honest about your story is the key to breaking down that shame and that stigma that exists in our society. Because the first thing that we hear when there's a shooter, or when there's a crisis, or when there's a big news story is, oh, the perpetrator was mentally ill and there was mental illness, and they were hearing voices to kill people and they shot up the school, and it's all related back to mental illness. And that's actually not the case. Like in most cases, people with serious mental illness are victims of violent crime, not
Mm.
perpetrators of violent crime. So, um, yeah, it's just, you know, breaking down that shame and being able to say, this is my story, I own it, this is what I struggle with, and you may struggle with this too, and it's okay,
Yeah.
is
That's
huge.
exactly what I was going to get to is like, oh, I wanted to talk about this. And then as you were talking, I was thinking like, because of the way that you're speaking, it's so grounded and open and honest. And like, you can tell there is not shame there, or there might, whatever. Or of course, I think it can
Yeah.
be residual. Shame is not a clear thing. I don't like,
No,
like
no.
same with
Right,
grief.
right.
Shame and grief are like, you think you're through it? No. You think you're through it? No. Well, they're on waves. So
Right,
like,
right, right.
it's like, but like thinking of like, yeah, like I was like, wow, thank you for speaking, so honestly about that. And that by you sharing your story and in that way, and that was just a glimpse of it, that what that can do for how anyone who is struggling in a similar way, anyone who also doesn't understand it, because again, we just hear like a
Right,
word, oh, that's schizophrenia or this, and oh, blah, 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 or yeah, bipolar. And we like just hear like, we have one
right.
lens of what we think that is by one story or whatever, too. Like, and then also, too, I think, I'm sure like I have, friends with family members and stuff that have been in struggle for years, like yeah, like got into diagnosis when they were young and then given a bunch of pills, and then that made them different this way, and then this, where it's like going through this. And I think too, like there can be like shame, not even about it's but like, oh, this person, my family, like we act as if,
Yeah,
oh, there's something wrong with them, so then there's something wrong with me because they're part of me somehow or something. And it's like not
right,
really, like, and
right,
like, and also that we're
right.
all humans with our own, I think everyone has mental health struggles on some level, and if they
Absolutely,
don't,
absolutely.
if they are not acknowledging them, it's because they're, yeah, like it's gonna explode at some point.
Right.
Like if you're
I
like, oh,
always
I'm
used to
fine, everything's
say,
great. Like,
I'm trucking along. But I always used to say there's just the diagnosed and the undiagnosed, right? Like everybody struggles. Everybody has their own like issues that they go through. Everybody experiences depression at some point. Everybody experiences grief and loss at some point. Everybody experiences anxiety at some point. Everybody will, I would be willing to bet that at some point in your life you may have had an experience that you're like, oh, is that like reality? Like, am I in reality right now? Like, and that's maybe the closest to psychosis that they get, but we all experience it on some level. It's just like the amount to which it's first of all pathologized, and second of all, the amount that it affects our functioning, right? Because there can be people who have depression, can go through their day, go to work, come home, have a life, make food for their kids, like, and they just have this like kind of low grade, like melancholy all of the time, but they function, right? And then you might have somebody else who has this like severe, like, I don't want to live anymore kind of depression. And it's all on kind of a continuum, right? It's all on a spectrum of how like severe you're experiencing this. So that people can function with depression, people can function with anxiety. Some of the most productive people in our society, I think, have high anxiety or are driven in that kind of way. People have the gift of mania. There's a great author named Kay Redfield Jamison. She's a doctor actually, and she talks about her experience with bipolar disorder, and she has this book out called Exuberance. And she talks about mania and how it's such a gift sometimes, and you can be so creative,
mhm.
and so like lit up by the experience of mania, that some people never want to get rid of that. So there's a lot of different pieces of mental health that people experience on a day-to-day basis that, you know, may or may not affect their ability to function, right? So it's a really fascinating kind of subject when you really piece it apart and dig into it. But a lot of people don't want to dig into it because it brings up again, that shame and that
Shame.
guilt and those feelings
Or
of, I
something
should be
something wrong
better.
with me.
Right.
Like, this is so like, I remember in my 20s, like, I thought there was such a like negative connotation to like stress even. And I was like,
Ye-
I am such a like go get, because that also was like in the height of, I had made my dream come true of being a live sound engineer. I was hired by this second
Yep.
largest touring sound company before I got graduated from college. I was like, got to go out on my first tour as an engineer doing sound for the band instead of like a tech, which most people did. So I was like 22, touring with Grammy Award winning artists, staying at the Ritz Carltons. Like, Dolly Parton was hiring me. Like, I don't know where on the scale it was, but like in these same years of like things are happening. I am living my dream. I am loving it. I am doing great. It is a high stress job though. It
Right.
is such a high stress job, but
Absolutely.
also like traveling a world, staying in these amazing places with good people that were like the most amazing, lovely people. Like, things were good. Loved where, like life was good. But I remember like, I can like even remember where I lived and like where I took my regular walks. I've always been like a walker, and maybe like
Yeah.
talking on the phone with my sister and like catching up and like everything's good, all good, like this. Like, I was always everything's good, all good. And like, I wouldn't even allow myself to admit like, no, I am never stressed out. Like, I wouldn't even allow myself to admit that I had stress, because that meant something was wrong with me, or like that I wasn't capable. I have no
Right.
idea. But it's so funny to think
Yeah.
back now that it's now even like, well, there's even like good stress. Again, like, I was working a super high stress.
Right.
I was responsible for what everybody was hearing on stage, and like
Right.
in live thing, and there's a lot of troubleshooting and stuff like that. So it also is like, of course I would have felt stress, or like, of course, like, it's just this funny thing that I like just remember I was like, I am not allowed to feel stress. And it's like, yeah, you get stress in traffic. Like it's like
Right.
stress is a normal thing. It's not something
Yeah.
is wrong with you because you feel stressed. You also feel stress in good, positive situations. Like,
Yes.
there's positive stress.
Absolutely.
Like, whatever. It's like this funny thing, but
Absolutely.
it's like, just looking back, I sometimes will like go back to that moment, like, wow, like, so interesting that I
Yep.
could not even acknowledge that I experienced stress.
Yeah.
Because like
Yeah.
because that would mean something's wrong with me. Like,
Right. Right.
like that's like, I'm giving that example because like such a
We're a
small thing. Like, we,
we're a very pain avoidant society, right? We're a very like anything wrong, we want to avoid that at all costs kind of society. So when we do feel stress, when we do feel grief, when we do feel loss, when we do feel shame, we want to avoid that at all costs. And I think that that mentality and that culture that has permeated American life so much is like part of what stigma has grown on. And it's so interesting because, you know, it's just this like this kind of insidious thing that we don't want anything wrong. We just want to go about this happy life and do happy things and have happy kids and have happy parents and have happy jobs, and it doesn't work that way.
yeah,
Like if you would have asked me when I was like 17 before this all started, I would have said like, yeah, I'm gonna have a husband, I'm gay. Like I would have been like, I'm gonna have a husband, I'm gonna have like 3 kids, I'm gonna live in the suburbs, I'm gonna be a teacher, and life did not work out that way. Life did not work out that way. And it's so interesting because when you're young, you don't realize like how much your life can shift in just a few years. If you would have told me in college that I would have started experiencing psychosis when I was 19, I would have been like, what's that? Because I had no clue. So when it's happening to you and you're young and you don't know what's going on, it's scary as hell.
yeah.
Um,
I mean, I feel
but
like it'd be scary at any age.
yeah, true. It is.
But
It is.
especially, uh, okay, getting back to, I mean, we're not off topic, but like the like shame
Yeah.
and that yeah. So something that was surprising to me, because when I asked this question, like, what do you wish people were more open about? I honestly don't know what I expected people to respond with. And some people did say, like, um some like I remember I saw something about, like especially for like wellness or fitness people, like they wish they were more open about actually like, oh, and I also use that, like, because there's so much like,
Yeah.
oh, just do this or just eat this way or just blah blah blah, like that, or even like I was not certain, like, but like other, like, or things that people get done. Like, of course, too, there's the like trying to look your best thing and people getting little procedures or fillers or this and that. Like, I did like expect that sort of stuff to come up, and I did. I also like was thinking, because I was like, oh, what about like business owners and stuff too? Like, the reality of finances is something that I like somewhat frustrates me, because there'll be like these people like coaches like, you can make all this money this, but then meanwhile, like, I know their actual situation is that they have money from somewhere else, and
Right.
sure, their business might be making money, but they also don't even have the like fear of what if this doesn't work out thing, like,
Right.
too, like there's
Right.
like
Right.
that sort of stuff. I
Absolutely.
also was like, if people being more open about the fact that they have sexually transmitted diseases.
Right.
Is that such a
Right.
shame thing? Like, and I don't think I've ever admitted that I like when I like got diagnosed with one forever ago, I had like the biggest panic, shock, fear. Oh my God, where did this come from? Blah blah blah. Like, such like it was the death of me. And then they were like, oh, 1 in 3 people have this, and I was like, that can't be right. And then when I like finally like opened up to some of my best friends, and I was shattered, and oh my gosh, feeling so much shame. They're like, oh yeah, I have that too. I'm like, what? So we're all
What?
like, it is like, oh wow,
Right.
it is ends up being
It's so
like,
common. Right.
like oh no. Like, so I was like, that was something I thought, but what I was interested that a lot more people were responding that they wish that people were more honest about what they thought and what they were feeling. And people said this in
Yeah.
different ways, and some of them are long and some of them are short, but like what I was reading into it mostly like be in relationships that you have with people, that people aren't really being honest about, oh, that hurt my feelings, or I don't want to do that, or I actually don't like, like that, things
Yeah.
like those, like people that you are in relationships with that are not being open and honest about their actual thoughts, opinions, because
Yeah.
probably because they either don't want to get into I was going to say argument or confrontation, but those aren't the right words.
Yeah.
They don't want to like have those more challenging conversations. I don't think we're I think that's something we could be learning maybe in school. It's funny because my kids are now like first and second grade. That's early, but I'm like, I don't really care about your grades. I would rather I'm like, I do like, do your work,
Right.
this, but like I'm never going to be like, I go to these teacher meetings and I'm like, oh, okay, great. And then I'm like, I just want to know, like, how are they
Yeah.
as people?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, how do they do? Like, yeah, but I'm like, I would love for them to like learn, how can we have a let's learn how to have a
Right.
conversation. Like there's a lot of skills I
Yeah.
feel like we could be learning. Like,
Yeah.
how do you have a
Absolutely.
conversation with someone when you don't agree? Or you don't want to hurt somebody's
Right.
feelings, and also you do want to be honest. Hey, I don't like when you say that, or I don't.
Right. Like, how do we approach that? And it's so interesting because, when we think of there's so much trauma in our society, like just the experience of COVID and the pandemic was traumatic for the whole nation, like the whole world. There's so much trauma, like trauma of floods and natural disasters and the trauma of abuse, and it's just rampant everywhere. And we think of trauma responses, which are like fight, flight, or freeze, which people talk about a lot, but there's another one that there's talking about now, which is called fawn, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, which is really about people pleasing as a
Mm.
trauma response. Um, and it's really interesting because I think that we're seeing it so much because, people are like, oh, I don't want to cause a confrontation, so I'm just going to go along with it. Or I don't want to speak up and use my voice because I don't want to be seen as this or that, or whatever it is. But I think we're seeing this like need to people please all the time because of our collective trauma, and it's just really turning out to be ineffective and causing more problems than it's solving.
Yeah.
um you know
Wow.
and
Like,
and
that's
I'm a big
interesting.
yeah, like I'm a big believer in trauma informed care and being more trauma informed, because I think that basically like all of mental health and all of a lot, I shouldn't say all of, a lot of mental health and a lot of substance abuse challenges and a lot of distresses that people face on an everyday basis are responses to trauma, and responses to being activated by, or that you encountered, or that's been passed down to you, from your parents and their parents and their parents. Um, and we're seeing a lot of, like, we see fighting, right? So we see people, I mean, look at the war in the Middle East right now. We see fighting. 3 people just got shot, like in Burlington, Vermont, which is where I'm from, for being Palestinian. Like, we see fighting. We see people freezing, so just clamming up and stopping and just like ignoring everything around them and just like freezing. um
Mm.
Fight, flight, like fight, flight, people like just leaving, just like
Yeah.
giving up
Well,
and
that's
being like throwing
also,
their hands
yeah.
up,
And that's what I was
and
going to say.
it's
I've seen that. I feel like a lot of times, what people would rather do, unfortunately, or it feels easier to like be like, okay, I don't want to have that conversation. I don't want to bring this up. I don't want to
right,
whatever. So like they're just severing relationships or ghosting them, or that is sort of like
right,
the flight,
or
right? Like
just
even like
like
a relationship.
right,
So this like and it's just this fear. I don't know what it is. Like what is that
right,
thing that is the fear of like having a conversation and being honest? Is it like the fear of hurting their
right,
feelings, the fear of they're not going to be accepted? Like what is, like, there's probably so many
right,
things that are coming up because and it's a lot of the stuff I think can be about big stuff, but I think like small stuff. And instead of just addressing it, being like, okay, that person's not for me, then I guess, or we don't get blah blah, or we're not
right,
vibing, or whatever the thing
right,
you could be saying. And so it's like, let me just do what the
right.
flight method, instead of let me have a
Yeah.
conversation here and be
And that's
honest.
so interesting because we're not taught to have conversations like that. Like
I
you
know
had
that's
said with your girls,
I know. I'm like,
like
maybe I
you
need to
wish,
start a like. This is what we need to be learning in school.
right,
I
absolutely,
wouldn't be
because
teaching it, but I can
like
we'll hire people like. No, I'm just kidding.
but yeah, like it's such an interesting thing because, like, in some of the trainings and stuff that I've been to around like mental health topics, it's been like, why can't you say this is making me feel uncomfortable right now? And I really want to change the subject, or what you said really affected me and I'm not sure how to handle that right now. Or, like, the way that you're treating me right now is really activating me and I'm feeling threatened. Could we take a minute apart? Like, how different would the world be if we were able to say those things,
Right.
honestly and without repercussion, without getting defensive, without taking things personally, without a huge struggle or battle, but, just be like, okay, like, I'm sorry I activated you. How about we take 5 minutes and come back and talk about it later? Or, oh, I didn't realize that, what I was saying was, so upsetting, or what I was doing was so upsetting. So let's talk about that. Um, and how different our society would be if we talked openly like that and had those conversations, you know, even to say like, hey, this is a really great conversation and I'm really enjoying it. Even to put that out on the table and,
Yeah.
and be honest with how we're feeling. Um, but we don't do that. We just don't do it. And it's sad. And I wish that people, and especially like kids, were given the tools and the skills and the resources to stand up for themselves and say, this makes me feel uncomfortable, or this is a really good conversation, or I really appreciate this. And really owning their sense of self-worth and
Yeah.
their autonomy, because I think that's
I
huge.
yeah, I love those sort of prompts, I guess, like, or just like ways to be able to like have these things to um what do you think, like, why, because yeah, there's the fear, or of the person that's saying that is maybe in feeling the discomfort or something like that. And then
Right.
also, because knowing some person on the receiving end of that could take that as like an attack or something, which,
Yeah.
not saying so don't use it, but like, that could be like defensive, like, oh, what do you mean this?
Right.
And so is it the fear of, like, again, like even saying something like that was very like kind and compassionate, and sort of not like you are making me feel this way,
Right.
but like, oh,
Right.
I'm uncomfortable here. You're not saying you are the one doing
Right.
this.
And really
Um,
owning it with the I statements, and it comes back to like saying like it's my uncomfort. It's not you, it's my discomfort. And really owning it. Um, but people take things, like I said, so personally and
yeah.
like such an attack or so defensive. And even saying like, I don't want you to take this the wrong way, or this isn't about you, this is about how I'm feeling right now. And owning it in that way, still can make people feel a certain way.
Yeah, it's
So
like as soon
it's
as somebody
it's
says this isn't about
hard.
you, then you're like, yes, it is. That means
Yes,
it
it
is. No, I'm just
is.
kidding.
It means it
Um,
is.
what was I gonna say? There's something. I mean, too. Like, I wonder again, like if that is one of the reasons that most people aren't being open and honest is because we just
Yeah.
presume they're not going to take it well. They're going to get defensive. And so then I don't want to have to like deal with that or like they're just
Right.
never going to understand. They're not going
Right.
to like see things my way. They're not going to be open to it. So then they don't even
Right.
try. And I think people are complicated and that everybody's
Absolutely.
on their own journey.
Yep.
And I also like, I definitely, of course, can like stereotype some people in my own life and feel like, oh, they're not going to understand this. And also am willing to try. But
Yep.
it's a learning. Okay, I've tried several times and I
Right.
continually get this response where they are not listening. They are not hearing what I have to say. They only go into more of an attack mode. Okay. So they are
Right.
not able to like have this sort of conversation, whatever. And for people like that in my life, I have just moved them into like, I don't have to cut them off completely,
Right.
but they're in like a different category.
Yeah,
Like
it's
these
like
are
a
the
different
people
time
I'm open
zone,
on at
right?
this. And also
Yeah,
knowing though, but they might ask me a question that's going to leave into that stuff that's this, whatever. And I have to remember, ooh, don't go down this path.
right,
They just open the door to go here and they're not trying to get into a fight or blah, blah, blah. They love me. They care about me. So they are interested in X. But I know
right,
from past experience that when we go down that pathway, it does not feel good to me. And I don't feel heard or held or seen and blah, blah, blah.
right,
I'm not saying that's their fault. That's my experience with that, blah, blah, blah. And maybe the relationship
right,
history, whatever. So I'm
right,
not going down that path. So I'm just going to say, oh, it's good. It's happening.
right.
Like give short answer where there's like
Yeah.
really no need even for a follow-up question and then go, have you been watching anything fun on TV recently? Like I think too we were told like don't talk about just topical filler stuff. Like what is your life and relationships if you're not going deep? For some people in my life, I love them. I can't go into certain areas with them. I'd love to know what's bringing you joy lately. What'd you eat lately? That's like,
Right, right,
so,
right. What's that series on Netflix? Right.
like
But
let's
it's
stick to these
true.
topics because I know, and again, I also realize they might not be. It might not be their wrongdoing. It's the history
Right,
of the relationship of the
right,
past. And so honestly, sometimes I'm like, they might even be saying the right thing now, but my body or
right,
something else is reacting to, even if they said the quote unquote right thing, I can't feel heard and seen because that's like
right,
an experience that's locked into my body.
right, right.
So it's
Exactly. And
like,
that goes back to those trauma responses, right? Because when we are in that situation and we have that trauma response, whether it was to freeze or to flee or to do whatever, it our body remembers. Like the body keeps the score, right? That's that beautiful book by Bessel van der Kolk. Like the body keeps the score. Like we keep that inside of us. And I was gonna say something else, and it was really cool, and it totally slipped out of my mind.
it
But
happens.
it does. But I was like, but it's so true. Like our body remembers. And oh, I remember what it was. There's that little saying that you see on memes and stuff that like everybody is fighting a battle that you know nothing about. So be kind, right? And like that's the story basically, that everybody has their own stuff. Everybody has their own, their own trauma, their own history, their own battles, their own struggles, how they feel inwards, like what was said to them in the past, everybody has those, whether they're struggling with depression, whether they're struggling with anxiety, maybe their husband just left them, maybe they're struggling with a substance abuse disorder, maybe their child was just diagnosed with autism, like who knows? Um, but we're all struggling with something, and above all, be kind. But that doesn't mean that you can't have boundaries, right? Like you were talking about, that's holding boundaries. So you can be kind and still hold a boundary and protect yourself, because nobody deserves to be treated in a way that makes them feel unheard or unsafe or unseen. So absolutely.
Yeah, and like I said too, it's like I don't necessarily have to blame that person. Like you
Right,
make me feel that way. It's based on a lot of stuff,
right,
even when they're saying the right thing on certain topics and stuff. I am unable to feel that way
right.
in that like conversation or
And
whatever.
that's okay.
And again, like me knowing that, and so then like so we
Right,
talk about these things.
right,
Like that's where like but yeah, but meaning like saying though, you don't know that until you have that. And I could just
right,
cut off communication with certain people
right.
like that. And it's a realization too. It's like, again, realizing that person is a human with their own stuff and they're actually not doing anything like, you know what I mean? Like they do love me
Yeah,
and like seeing that thing. So it's just too like, we don't like, I agree with these people that are saying, I wish people were more open and honest. And then I also
yeah,
see like, yeah, why it's not happening, but like letting yourself test the temperature, and there's going to probably be a little bit discomfort, maybe a lot of discomfort, but then you get to see what's going to be on the other side, and you get that information and
right.
new ways for you all to heal and bond and learn about yourselves and each other. And maybe it leads to a deeppening of relationship. Maybe it leads to,
Absolutely.
okay, this is,
How we need to do these.
this is just a mom for like a friend that I blah blah blah,
Yeah,
because we obviously don't see the same like that. Like, too, it's like you
right,
don't have to, not every person in your life has to be the exact same style of communication and relationship and
right,
friendship. And I feel like that's a hard thing to grasp, because
right.
I'm like, in a past experience, I had a hard time grasping that and like
Yeah,
and feeling like I needed to have everybody on the same playing field. And then like, oh yeah. And also people move around. Some people that I somewhat wrote off years ago but didn't cut the ties, but I had thoughts of,
yeah,
they ended up going through their own life experiences, and then what do you know, later I'm opening up to them about like, like they're one of the people I can like really open up with. It's just too,
right.
it's like everybody's in a different stage and journey of their life with their own traumas and their own like
Absolutely.
too. And just like, why
Absolutely.
not trying to be more open and honest things? And maybe that means like too, asking like, maybe like, what would you think, like how do we start that process of like,
Yeah,
like curiosity questions to like start
right. And
asking people
how
in
do we,
relationships to start
like, how
open
do
those
we,
doors.
yeah, like, how do we stay open? Like, that's the big question that I always find myself asking is like, how do we keep ourselves open? Like, open to possibility, open to allowing people in, open to allowing ourselves out. Um, I think there's a big thing with like not only letting people into our worlds, but us like expanding out into their worlds too. But how do we stay open? Like how do we do that? And I think it's a huge question, and it always like intrigues me because I see some young people and they're very like rigid and they're very closed-minded and you know, they're very like it's almost like this like set in their ways kind of thing, like like, oh, I have a way of doing it and this is what I've always known and this is what I learned and this is the way I was brought up and this is the way I'm going to do it. But how do we break down those walls and be like, there's other possibilities, there's other ways of getting in, there's other routes, there's other ways to like you can manifest whatever you want, like there's like a whole world out there that you're not experiencing because you're locked into this one way of doing something, because it's safe, right? Because it's safe. So how do we break down those comfort zones and step outside of that? And that starts, I think, with having those tough conversations and
Yeah.
owning how you feel, you know?
And that's what it is. Maybe it's like, of course, like reframing. It's like, okay, instead of thinking about a tough conversation, it's like, an inquiring conversation or an opening
Right.
conversation, or like too, like, you know, by
Right.
like prepping yourself that way, because safety is an illusion, I think.
Yeah, I'm
I mean, it
pretty
is of course a
sure.
real thing, but there also is the illusion of safety in that we feel safe in our routines, in our relationships, in this and that. And like, yeah, like allowing yourself to open up, because it really can create a deepening. And again, like you're collecting information. So maybe it is like, oh, maybe you're proven right. So maybe that's also a reason to have more opening conversations,
Right.
to be proven right. See, I knew that
Right.
they weren't going to be open to this. No, I'm just kidding. If you need, I'm
I
all
love
like,
it.
whatever you need to do. Like, if you're like, if you need to see it that way.
Oh my God. So once again,
uh,
I am right and you are wrong. My God. I feel like that sounds like Congress or something.
I don't know. And I think especially
Oh,
like this, it's funny because, you know, the holiday, it's not funny. I don't know. It's
yeah.
realistic. That's life, that the holidays, it's such a focus on like, okay, it's joy and celebration time and like coming
Right.
together. And it's so beautiful, but it's still, I feel like the holiday time can bring up the most stress,
Yep.
anxiety, grief, comparison. I'm not enoughness, you know, one, especially because of social media these days and whatever you can see,
Right.
like, oh, wow, that person's going to a lot of parties. I wasn't invited to any parties. Or wow, look at their fancy Christmas outfits. I don't have fancy Christmas outfits. Wow, that person's going on a trip to Disneyland for the, like, there's like,
Right.
can be that sort of stuff. And then like again, like the feeling like, oh, what is everybody else invited to all of these things? And I've spent plenty of holidays alone. I actually just spent Thanksgiving alone, and I was like, I could have gone to where my kids with their dad. I did that last year. Like,
Yeah.
no, I didn't eat any Thanksgiving food. I didn't make any, and it felt great. But I remember
Yeah.
years ago, probably in, you know, when I was, yeah, like single or whatever too. Well, no, that I mean, I a lot of times, she was like around the world on tour on Thanksgiving. So I did have that. It's just a day. And also we can celebrate
Yeah.
at this. But I do think in many ways, or even 4th of July, I remember some years after I got off tour and thinking like, oh, I'm finally home for 4th of July, this big party holiday. No, I haven't been invited to any 4th of July
The
parties.
holidays.
And really feeling like, okay,
Right.
cool. Like, well, maybe I'll like go grill out something to feel like on theme. But I really didn't care and feel left out. But at the same time, it was this societal like, oh no, people are going to ask me what I did for 4th of July or whatever. And it's nothing. And like, what, and I again was like, no, I'm fine. Like, I covered this,
Yeah.
but like, I think that we can feel like if we don't have all the plans or we're not invited to all
Right.
the things, and if and for whatever reason, it doesn't mean anything about me and my relationships. Like, who knows why you could not
Right.
have as big of, you know, holiday loss, people not
Right.
having the money to travel to all be together this year, like whatever the things, or just calendar scheduling, you
Right.
know, people not, whatever. There's so
Sickness.
many
Right.
reasons. Yeah,
Right.
COVID, because of COVID in the last couple of years, so many people were not being
Yeah.
able to spend the holidays together. There's
Right.
so many, and then, you know,
Right.
there's so many ways that I think, and then, oh, right, then you're going to maybe these parties or these gatherings with people who maybe you don't have the same opinions about, and this, or is so and so going to ask me why I'm not married yet, or like, you know, the questions
Right.
that you can get from blah blah blah. Like, there's so many than that. Yeah, like
Right.
anxiety of this, and I'm
Right.
a
Right.
social person. I am an extroverted person. I
Yeah.
can talk to anyone, and I yet still can get social anxiety of like, oh, I'm going to a party, even a party
Am I
where
gonna
I'm going to
know?
know. Actually, sometimes I get more social anxiety when it's a party when I'm going to know everybody there. I'm like,
Right.
oh, all right, buckle up. Let's
Right.
have
Right.
a tiny catch up conversation with 50 people, and maybe I'll have
Yep.
one good
Yep.
conversation with one. Like,
Yep. 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 It's true. And the holidays are hard because I think they bring up a lot of like feelings of I mean, holidays are very nostalgic and not everybody had a good holiday growing up, you know, like for some people it was
right.
all Santa and presents and family, but for other people's it was a lot of loss and struggle and aloneness. You know,
Yeah.
so it brings up all that too. So it's a complicated time and I really I feel like you should just honor it in whatever way you need to honor it, and do what you need to do for yourself to get through it, and to celebrate
Exactly.
how you're going to celebrate.
And I was
And
going to
if
say the
that means
opposite.
nothing, Nothing.
Exactly. I was going to say the opposite too, that a lot of people might have had beautiful family holidays growing up and then now don't really
They're
have
alone.
that same
Right.
thing or whatever too. And that also can be like the grief for what you're missing. Like, oh, I'm at this time in
Right.
my life, I assumed I would, my life would look like this. And so this is
Right.
how I would be celebrating. Like there's so many emotions
Right.
and thoughts and grief
Absolutely.
and stuff that come up this
Absolutely.
time. And I was just going to say the same thing. Like, I don't really, I mean, of course, I have lots of tips that I've shared over the years for all sorts of things that would all apply. But it's more so, I think, just by talking about it and the reality of it, I hope that that helps because it can be such a
Right.
focus of, yay, holidays, we made it, gratitude. Oh, okay, it's December, so let's set goals and let's go ahead and think about 2024 and blah, blah, blah. Like, it's like everything
Right.
is like so positive and action
Right.
oriented, which is not a bad
Right.
thing, but like, hey, by the way, you are not alone by any small margin if you
Right.
are having all of these other emotions too.
Right. Right. Absolutely.
And one of the things I will say too, like if it is like you find yourself like really like whether it's going into a comparison mode or not like, oh, I don't have this or grief mode, then it's like, well, what, like, oh, maybe it's like, yeah, I really wish that I had the experience that person is having. Okay, but like I can't have that right now. But like, what
Right.
is it really about that? Like, oh, is it, wow, they really feel like a sense of community, or like, oh, they are actually like, they seems like a lot of joy, or is it just like, wow, they have a lot of money to go spend on things? You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
like seeing the deeper, like, what is the deeper thing there? And
Yeah.
then like, okay, right, so it
Yeah.
is community. So maybe I don't have a huge family gathering, but can
Right.
I think of like one,
Right. Can I
way to like,
volunteer at my
yeah,
community
can I do
center and do that?
something that gets me out of
Yeah.
community? And right, and it doesn't even have to be with, because making plans during this time of year also can be
Right.
chaotic with the people that
And
do this, that,
stressful.
whatever. So it's like, yeah,
Right.
maybe it's just, oh, I'm going to make a point of going to my local coffee shop and like sitting in the coffee shop and saying like, you know what I mean? Or like, whatever, like,
Right.
it's just like, yeah,
Right.
we can create that sense of community. So it's like, what's really, or, you're oh, I'm remembering the past and growing up, like, okay, well, watch your favorite movie and have hot
Right.
chocolate and like, yeah, like allow yourself to do something
Look at old family
small that,
pictures. Like do something like honoring,
yeah,
honoring of that part of yourself.
but that, yeah, like there's no right or wrong way
No.
to move through the holidays or life in
Nope.
general.
No. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, any last things that you want to
Oh my
share, or tips or
gosh.
tidbits, or like we could definitely talk for
We
years.
could talk for a
Um,
year. Yeah, absolutely. But I don't know, I felt like this was like really good and it delved into a lot of things that I think people are like afraid to talk about at like mental health and shame and, being honest and getting honest and struggles at the holidays. Like that's all life right now. Like that's all life right now. So
yeah,
yeah,
and I mean,
I just appreciate you and your social media presence and being so positive, and I love your book and I'm just a fan, and I just appreciate, and this is something that I've always wanted to do, and I like took a chance and reached out and like it worked out.
yeah,
So
it might
it
take like a
actually
year or so, but no, I'm just kidding. No, I don't remember the first time you emailed me, but
it was
like,
it was a while ago, but that's okay. But it worked. But it was beautiful. Like it was beautiful timing. Like it worked
yeah,
out so perfectly. And like I just, I'm just a person. I'm just like a little person who lives in Vermont. Like I have an interesting story to tell, but
you do have an interesting
like
story
it's
to tell.
just, I think if you have, if you see a light and you see somebody that you identify with and that, fits your values and fits your story, and like reach out and see what can happen. So this is like a dream of mine. So thank you for helping me get that into fruition. So that's
Oh,
awesome.
you're so welcome, and thanks for reaching out and for. And yeah, it's like also it's like, oh no, I really do want to get in your journey. I just was like, oh, with your background, yeah, since Tara has been pitching me with, yeah, like different mental health topics and stuff like that. And and I was like, oh, these are great, and I want to talk about this. Will you come on with me? And then I like as we were talking, I'm like, oh, but yeah, let's get into your life journey. I don't know what's going to happen with the future of me and podcasting, but I've been thinking about doing things differently. And yes, and like, you know, talking to more people who are not like have some big external presence.
Right.
Obviously, I love
Right,
going into
right.
their journeys, but like, yeah, I have been
Absolutely.
thinking of like, just
Just
talking
little
to
old Tara from
people,
Vermont.
like, or
Yeah.
just people, like, but
Yeah.
yeah. Anyway, so thank you for saying yes. And I feel like as
Yeah,
you were
thank
like wrapping that
you.
up too, that I think a theme of what we ended up talking about was acceptance, really. And
Yes.
so like that's the
Yes.
thing, is like having this acceptance for yourself, whether it's the things, you know, you might feel shame that you're going to be shamed for, and then also what's holding you back from like not being open with others. Because again, like when I'm saying, oh, what do you wish people would be more open about, when one person starts to be more open about it, then you can see in that reflection, like, oh, me too. Oh, I've had that
Right.
experience too, even if it's totally different. We are all so different. So the experience can be totally different, but just
Right.
resonating with someone's story and a feeling or whatever. And so that's the thing, though. It's like, oh, what can we be more open about? We want other people to be more open about. It's like, okay, well, how can I start to be more
Right.
open? What is something I could be
Right.
more open about in my life with people? Maybe that's
Right.
whether that's having some sort of conversation of, you know what, I don't like this restaurant. Because that too, like, I don't know if I used to, maybe it was like because of like my food, my health and autoimmune stuff. And it's like, oh, I don't want to, like, you know, I had certain like dietary needs. And then some people like roll their eyes at, oh, you only eat hairs. And like, you know, I know people, it's hard to advocate for yourself and say, no, I can't get to eat
Yeah.
there because it doesn't make me feel good. That's hard. It is hard. And like
Right.
still can be a challenge for me, who is like, I'm very like strong and blah, blah, this,
Right.
um, but I know people that too. It's like, yeah, you might just say, oh, that's fine. Yeah, I can eat wherever you want, like that too. Like, so even something like that, like being open about, I don't like the restaurant. I
Right.
actually prefer this food or something like that too, because what
Yeah,
happens to when you're
yeah.
not being open and honest and you're leaning into that, what was the fawning, that
Yes.
then you end up holding on to a lot of resentment that you might not even
Yes.
realize, and like anger, and then acting like
Absolutely.
these people are so blah, blah, blah. But really it's like
Yeah.
you're not being open and honest. So
Right.
thinking about what do you wish other people would be more open and honest about? And then yourself, like, where can I be more open and honest? And it might be about something really small, but it actually is affecting you. And that's the best place to
Right.
start, is something small. Like, you
Right.
know what? It really annoys me what, and obviously not things can be fixed. You could like tell your partner, it annoys me that you never put your socks in the laundry basket, and you can continuously try that. And that might not, it might not go anywhere, but who knows? They might
Who
actually
knows?
change their
It might.
behavior, but we can
Right.
make up too. Oh, this person's not going to
Yeah.
change. This person's not going to be willing to hear me. This
And
person's,
those are
oh,
the stories that we tell ourselves that get us in
that was,
trouble.
uh, it's already always listening was something I learned. I don't know if it was from Matthew and Terces Engelhart or for someone else, like from a workshop I attended decade plus ago. They said this thing that we do called already always listening, which is basically like, we are already like projecting this is how the person's going to respond, this is who they are, so we don't attempt to like have these conversations or try things out, because we're
Right.
just like, they're going to say no, they don't like Mexican food, like, you know, like I was saying something
Right.
like
They
that
don't
could be a
like
truth,
fajita
that could
crazy.
be truth, they don't like Mexican food, but like but you know, like these things that we don't even allow for these growth or the conversations or
Right.
shift or whatever possibilities even for ourselves, because like, no, that's just, this is how it is, that's just how it
Right.
is. And not allowing then, so we can act like they're never going to change, but we're also like not opening that door, because
Right.
again, we're all on our own journey, and somebody that you might
Yep.
think they're never going to change, they're like this, you may be surprised of how they
Yep.
will open themselves up and learn and
Yep.
accommodate you. And also, it might not go well the first time you have one of these
Right.
conversations, meaning,
Absolutely.
but
And
also like, because one person in my life that when I do need to have like a conversation, usually the conversation itself, oh, it doesn't feel good and there's some blah blah, but change
right.
actually happens from it. So the
Exactly.
conversation
Because there's
itself,
that level of acceptance. There is that level of acceptance. And through that acceptance, that's when you can be open to change.
and me too, like it doesn't feel good for somebody to say, oh, I don't like, did you know that when you do this it kind of feels like that? Like, of course I don't want anybody to feel a certain way, but how am I going to learn, oh
If I don't
shit, I had
know.
no idea I was
Right.
offending someone, or that my presence is blah 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 like this when I act like this. Like, it feels like, how are we as humans going to learn if no one is telling us, like, hey, by the way, you kind of come off as an asshole when,
When you do XYZ.
like,
And
I
I'm
don't know, there was some recently in a situation where I was like, I kind of feel like an asshole. How come, like, No one told me that, but I was like, would anybody give me the feedback of you were a
Right.
little like
You're a little on the asshole spectrum right now. Just saying. But
so
yeah,
accepting ourselves, opening that door up, and like also realizing the conversation might feel really challenging. You might end it feeling like, oh, that was awful, and change can come from it.
absolutely. That's a beautiful place to like wrap things up.